What is the creepiest thing you have ever witnessed? Ask Reddit. My house is located right next to a main road, and I have windows that face the street directly. It was late at night. I could not sleep, and I decided to tire myself out a little bit by jumping rope. In the middle of my workout, I took a glance outside, and there I saw him. There was a man standing on the near side of the road, right under the light of a street light. He was staring straight at me. He was not moving. It felt like a bad horror movie. My entire body froze with fear. As soon as I saw his creepy silhouette, I ducked down to the floor immediately. My heart was beating 1,000 miles per hour. I did not dare to move. For a few seconds, there was absolute silence. When I looked back up carefully, he was gone. He had simply disappeared. Nowadays, it seems like a funny situation to me. He was probably just a homeless person who was totally confused about why someone would start jumping rope at 12 o'clock at night, and when I dropped like that so suddenly, he must have run away in a panic. It is hilarious. But at that moment, I was scared to death. A few things before we begin. First, a suicide warning, in case it is a sensitive topic for anyone. Second, I have explicit permission to share this story. And third, all of this happened about 5 years ago. I have been working for a little over 10 years in drug and alcohol therapy. During all this time, I have been a technician, and I have performed hundreds, if not thousands, of admissions. One day, I was training a new female coworker on the intake process. A person came in who was totally out of it. He was under the effects of methamphetamine and completely wasted. The patient was drifting in and out of reality at moments. He had not slept in days. You could see it in his eyes. Suddenly, the patient collapses in his chair and starts snoring a little. There was a moment of silence in the room, so my coworker and I started working on the computer to finish the rest of the paperwork. But then it happened. The patient suddenly startled, as if he had been struck by lightning. He looked the new coworker directly in the eyes, a deep look filled with hatred. He screamed at her that her husband's death had not been her fault. My coworker just stood there, petrified. Her face went pale. Then the patient took a threatening step toward her. "You have to understand that it was not your fault," he blurted out with effort. His fists were tightly clenched. I was sure he was going to hit our coworker at any moment. I stayed calm and said, "You need to sit down right now." The patient looked at me, slammed the table with all his strength with his fists, and said one more time, "It was not your fault." Then he rested his head on the table and went unconscious again. It was freaking intense. My coworker immediately left the room, and I called another technician to take the patient to the infirmary. When I went to see her later, she was crying, her eyes out. I only knew her by sight, but what I did not know was that her boyfriend had intentionally taken his own life. She had been blaming herself the entire time for it. It was one of the most insane things I have seen in my life. The patient said later that he remembered nothing. Absolutely nothing. Reading the previous story has given me freaking goosebumps. I still feel a tingling sensation all over my body. If this story is true, and I am usually very skeptical about what I read on Reddit, then I am starting to believe that there is something more behind all of this. Perhaps addicts who are in that state are in fact possessed by some kind of entity, as if drug use had opened a door in their body through which something else can enter. I say this because I myself had an experience that chilled the blood in my veins. One time I was sitting at a bus stop late at night. I was a woman who was talking to herself non-stop. I had already seen her several times. I was never sure if she was under the effects of hard drugs, or if she simply had a serious mental disorder. But every time I saw her, She was having heated conversations with thin air. That day I decided to stay sitting there and listen carefully. I wanted to know what she was actually saying. And then it happened suddenly. She started pronouncing my mother's name, loud and clear. My heart started to race. She kept talking about my mother and my father's divorce, details that nobody could know. She talked about a black vehicle that we had owned years ago, and then came the blow. She started talking about the woman my father had cheated on my mother with. She said she was Cuban. I was totally shocked. My father had indeed cheated on my mother, and my mother always firmly believed that the woman was Cuban. After this incident, I specifically asked her about it one more time. While I was listening to that woman, my heart was hammering against my ribs. It was almost as if she knew perfectly well that I was listening to her. She wanted to show me that she had me figured out, that she knew everything about my life. Of course, one could say that it was all a huge coincidence, but deep down, it does not feel that way. When I was about 9 years old, I answered the landline phone at my house. The man called me by my name. He said he knew my mother and tried to chat with me. I did not know him, and back then I did not like talking to adults at all. So I told him, "I am going to get my mother," and I ran away. She picked up the phone, but the man had already hung up. A few weeks later, a girl from a grade above mine disappeared. As it turned out later, she had told her friends that a man had contacted her. He claimed to be a friend of her mother, and he wanted to pick her up after school to buy a surprise gift for her. She was kidnapped and murdered. Her body was not found until months later, but they never caught the man. That was in the early 1990s. It turned out that a whole series of girls had received the same call as I did. It seemed like he was in the middle of choosing his victim. The FBI even came to our house to ask me questions about that phone call. It still haunts me even 30 years later. I still hope they catch the guy. It is absolutely heartbreaking. I grew up in New York. When my mother and I went out, we always took the train or the bus. You can imagine the crazy things I saw during my childhood, but there is one thing that I simply cannot get out of my head. I was sitting on the train when this homeless woman got on. She was totally wasted, probably under the effects of some hard drug. At first, she was just screaming random nonsense, the typical stuff you see with crack addicts, nothing out of the ordinary for New York. But suddenly she stopped dead in her tracks. She locked her eyes directly onto mine and started laughing at me. While she maintained eye contact, she urinated on herself, right there, in the middle of the subway car. She walked up to me and said, "Those dreams will never stop." In that moment, my heart almost stopped. I had suffered for years from an intense and recurring nightmare. I often woke up crying without even realizing it. How could she know that? It was probably just a freaking terrifying coincidence, but man, it scared me to death. In the end, the nightmares did stop. So screw it. Nowadays, it actually cracks me up. I have blinds on my windows, but I do not have curtains. And that night, they were a little bit open. I am often too lazy to close them all the way, and I leave a crack open toward the sidewalk. A mistake. Suddenly, I was petrified. Through the crack, I saw some legs. Someone was walking outside on the sidewalk, right in front of my house, back and forth, over and over again. The sound of the footsteps on the asphalt could be heard clearly through the glass. Who is lurking out there in the middle of the night? Why is he stopping exactly in front of my window? My heart was hammering in my chest. I sat there in the darkness, paralyzed for a good while. In the end, I gathered all my courage. I crawled closer with my hands trembling, and I dared to take a look under the blinds. There was a teenager there. He was simply looking at his cell phone, completely absorbed in the screen. He had no idea that I was watching him, or that he almost gave me a heart attack. Nowadays, this is proof to me of how easily I can psych myself out. My own fantasies are my worst enemy. I was driving late at night on the highway. The fog was so thick that I could barely see 2 meters in front of me. Visibility was really bad. Everything was gray and freaking silent. Suddenly, I saw a light, a flashing signal swinging back and forth in the middle of the road through the fog. It was getting brighter and brighter as I got closer. At first, I thought it was a breakdown or something of the sort. But when I was close enough, I saw a guy. He was standing in the middle of the road, waving his cell phone flashlight like a maniac to warn traffic. Right behind him, it was pure chaos. 2 cars had crashed head-on. There was wreckage everywhere, and then I saw it all over the asphalt. There were bodies lying down, motionless. No ambulance had arrived yet. No police. No emergency lights. Just that guy with his little light signal in the middle of the fog. It looked like a battlefield. An image that I will not be able to get out of my head for a long time. All of this happened more than a decade ago, but I have not forgotten a single moment. At that time, I had moved to another state for work, and everything was new to me. One weekend I went out with my friends. It was around 8 o'clock in the evening, and we were at a bus stop waiting in the darkness. There was an older man, a homeless person. He approached me and started talking to me non-stop. I could not understand a single word of what he was saying. It was an incomprehensible murmur, but his voice was trembling. And while he was talking to me like that, suddenly he started to cry. Tears were running down his dirty face. I have never seen so much pain in a person's eyes. It was a deep and desperate sorrow that chilled me to the bone. Then the bus arrived. I got on quickly and left him there, but the encounter had left me deeply shaken. Already on the bus, I started to cry as well, just thinking about him and that heartbreaking look. Later that same night, he appeared to me in my dreams. It was haunting. In the dream, he was taking valuable things from me, things that meant a lot to me. They were gifts from my boyfriend at the time, objects with high emotional value. Starting the next day, everything went from bad to worse. It was as if that encounter had triggered a chain reaction. The year that followed was without a doubt the worst year of my entire life. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. To this day, I wonder if that man wanted to tell me something that night, or if he snatched something from me that I never got back. A new house can truly drive you crazy if you are not yet used to all of its little quirks and strange noises. It is that unsettling silence of the first few nights that makes every creak sound twice as loud. I had never lived in a 2-story house before. Everything was new to me. It took me a couple of nights to get used to the sound of my cats jumping off the bed in the middle of the night, right when I was trying to fall asleep. The problem is the wooden floor upstairs. When they land there, it creates a strange, hollow sound, very different from the floor downstairs. In the darkness, when you are alone in the bedroom, it does not sound like a cat. It sounds exactly like a heavy human footstep. I live alone. There should be absolutely no one but me wandering through this house. Every time that plop echoed above me, adrenaline rushed through my body. I would lay stiff in bed, staring at the ceiling while trying to hold my breath so I could hear better. Perhaps I was also more nervous than usual because I had not yet installed an alarm in this huge new building. You feel freaking vulnerable. The next morning you laugh about it when you see the cats. But in that moment, in the darkness, it is not funny at all. You inevitably wonder, what if this time it was not the cat? I was the only witness to a murder, I have told this story a few times before. I was sitting in an open-top Jeep, waiting for two guys who were on the sidewalk to stop arguing. Suddenly, one of them pulls a homemade shiv out of his sock and drives it directly into the other guy's eye with a straight arm. The crunching sound was disgusting. The attacker ran away. I ran over there. Blood was spurting from the guy's face onto the sidewalk. To make a long story short, he was already dead by the time the ambulance arrived. I was supposed to testify in court, but the other guy pleaded guilty, and he got, I believe, about 20 years. That was a long time ago, but not long enough for me to be able to forget that sound. Something similar happened to me. I was in college when two friends and I decided to go skating in downtown Los Angeles. While we were on an embankment and some benches, we heard people shouting. We stopped and saw two guys dressed completely in Raiders gear confronting a man dressed all in white who was holding a shiny handgun. I later found out it was a .50 caliber Desert Eagle. Before I knew it, the first guy stepped toward the man in white, took a shot to the chest, and just slumped down. That sent hundreds of people in the park running, but I stood there, paralyzed by shock, watching from the embankment. The other guy, seeing his friend fall, lunged at the man in white with a beer bottle. The man in white fired into the air, but the gang member kept charging and took a bullet to the neck. He folded over himself, as if there were no bones in his body. At that point, the man in white fled, and so did my friends. I ran to the nearest building and asked the security staff to call the police. It was 1990, and I did not have a cell phone. By the time I returned to my vantage point, the entire crowd that had fled moments before was already surrounding the bodies. By the time the Los Angeles Police Department arrived about 5 minutes later, the dead men had been looted down to their underwear. I made the mistake of approaching the officers and telling them I had seen everything. After giving my description of the events, they told me to get in the patrol car. They whisked me a mile away, where we sat for what felt like forever, until they escorted the man in white out of a building and I positively identified him. Then we went back to the station, where I put everything in writing. Afterward, they asked me to wait in a room full of tiny school desks. Here is the scary part. After a while, I heard the door open, and they brought in the man in white. His hands were tucked into what looked like small brown paper bags. He sat down 3 desks away, and as soon as the officer left to get something, the man in white looked at me and just smiled. I left, and although I expected to be called for a follow-up on the case, I never heard from the LAPD again, which I was glad about. Cultural note. The term Raiders gear refers to the clothing of the NFL team Las Vegas Raiders. In the 1990s, street gangs in Los Angeles adopted it as an unofficial uniform. The .50 Desert Eagle is one of the largest and most powerful handguns in the world. In American popular culture, it is a symbol of extreme intimidation due to its massive size and its ability to cause devastating damage, far superior to a standard police pistol. I was not exactly a witness, as I did not see the murder itself, but I worked for a residential drug treatment program for women with children. Our front door was locked at all times. You needed a key card or for someone to let you in. I was in the front office making copies when I saw 3 of my girls running toward the front door. They were running faster than I had ever seen them run before, immediately after having heard a gunshot. They started banging on the door loudly, and I ran out to let them in. They were coming back from school with one of my coworkers when they witnessed a shooting. I looked toward the street, and the man was already dead. I assume his remains were scattered across the sidewalk. My coworker was near the body, on the phone with emergency services. However, that is not the image that has stayed burned into my brain. It is my 3 girls, between the ages of 4 and 11, clinging to me while screaming because they were so incredibly scared. I think about them often, and I wonder if they are okay. This is a different kind of fear. It is the moment you realize how close you were to danger without even noticing it. I was about 12 years old and I was skiing in Australia. It is cold enough there for snow, but it is rarely cold enough for the ice layers to be truly stable. During a descent, I accidentally went off the marked trail and lost my way. After a while, I reached a very flat area. In the distance, I saw a large sign and I headed straight toward it, thinking it would be a sign to return to the ski resort. When I reached the sign, I realized the text was on the back. I went around the sign and read the warning: danger of death thin ice. No trespassing. In that precise instant, I realized where I was standing. I was in the middle of a lake whose ice layer was barely thick enough to support someone. I looked back at my ski tracks in the snow, which crossed the entire frozen surface. I became aware that I could have sunk at any moment without anyone ever knowing what had happened to me. I looked around and saw that the shore was only a few meters away. Instead of taking the long way back, I glided as carefully as possible toward solid ground. I tried to distribute my weight evenly so as not to exert pressure on a single point. As soon as I felt solid ground under my skis, I kept going without looking back even once. I was in a rehabilitation center a few years ago due to my addiction to prescription painkillers. I will never forget some of the things I saw there. I could barely believe the effects that alcohol withdrawal produces. There was a woman who had already been in detox for more than 2 weeks and was still having terrible hallucinations from alcohol. She was constantly screaming about spiders that she saw everywhere. She was desperately trying to tear off her skin because she believed they were underneath it. It was horrifying to witness that, just because of alcohol. According to what I learned there, alcohol withdrawal syndrome is one of the few that can actually kill a person. It is absolutely incredible how dangerous it is. Later, I also learned that benzodiazepine withdrawal can also kill you. I wanted to mention this before someone else did. It is a harsh reality that is only understood when you see it with your own eyes. My partner and I were at Morecambe Bay Beach some time ago. It was low tide, and since we had time, we decided to walk as far as possible toward the sea. The bay seemed infinite and flat that day. We walked for about an hour on the damp sand. Despite the time passed, we never managed to reach the waterline. It was a strange, almost monotonous landscape. Finally, we decided to turn around and start the way back to dry land. It was later, when I told my father about our excursion, that I became aware of the danger. He immediately explained to me that Morecambe Bay is one of the most dangerous places on the British coast. Because of that, I started to investigate. There, the tide does not rise slowly, but rather comes in at a speed of about 16 kilometers per hour. The water rises so fast that the strong currents wash the sand directly from under your feet, which causes the immediate formation of quicksand. A very well-known incident occurred in the year 2004, when 21 cockle pickers were caught by the fast tide and drowned as they were unable to escape the water. After reading that, I checked the tide table for the day we were there. The data showed that the tide had already started to rise while we were still on our way back. We were still on the sand when the water behind our backs was already beginning to change direction. If we had walked just half an hour more toward the sea, the return probably would no longer have been possible. Cultural note: Morecambe Bay is famous for being one of the most treacherous coastal stretches in Europe. Its danger lies in a lethal combination: fast tides that advance at the speed of a running person and deep channels that fill before the water reaches the shore, surrounding and trapping walkers. Additionally, the geology of the bay creates liquid quicksand that can suck a person down in seconds. It is so dangerous that since the year 1548, the British Crown officially appoints a Queen's Guide to the Sands, the only person authorized and trained to lead people across the sandbanks safely.